Hey, what's up, my studes? And so, back again. Gonna have a little. I had a late night and everything with Sharonville, doing my clinicals with them actually, and I got there early. It was like 5:30, and we ended up having cardiac arrest. And so, well, with clinicals, I'm able to practice the skills that I learned in school, and one of them was we got to lead. We'll do the AHA algorithm for cardiac arrest, which includes PEA, well, pulseless electrical activity. We got asystole, which is like no activity. Also bradycardia, tachycardia, stuff like that. So we're able to work with that and able to bring ROSC, or like we're recirculation on ROSC is like a return of spontaneous circulation. And so so I got to lead my first cardiac arrest, which is scary, and got to intubate, would basically like put a tube down someone's throat on scene. So that was also kind of nerve wracking. But ultimately, we actually end up getting a heartbeat back. Actually, it was funny because um, I had to call the doctor and call it because after our second epinephrine push, basically epinephrine, basically adrenaline, after we pushed that the second time, there was still no activity. So the chief was like, "All right, Brian, you're taking over for a little bit. You go ahead and call a doctor whenever you see fit." And so, basically, we after three, that's when it's pretty much reaching that 15-20 minute mark. And so we keep going. After 2 minutes of CPR, we reassess, nothing. Then we push epi. I tell them to push epi, and then it goes back into no rhythm. So then we're like, all right, I guess we're good. And so we call it. I get help from one of the crew members to help me call the hospital, call the doctor, go through the process of doing that. And the doctor terminates. We walk back into the room, and then one of the crew members is like, wait a minute, I think there's a pulse. And everyone's like, you gotta be kidding me. We felt it. This dude's like chest starts like, and we're like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. So then that means we have to transport. And so dude's blood pressure was perfect. Heart rate was decent. I mean, he was in sinus tachycardia, or actually at the time it was like AFib RVR, which is like rapid ventricular rate. So basically, it looks like tachycardia, but then there's a bunch of squiggles in between. But there is a regular rhythm. And so, well, irregular rhythm. And so we get to the hospital, and he converts into sinus tachycardia, which is basically decent. I mean, it's a rapid heart rate, but he still has a QRS complex. He still has an S and T wave and all that, P wave especially as well too. So everything's firing, but the doctor or the RNs and nurses later on said that he has no brain activity, and so they have him on a machine, but we got him there just in time for his family to say their goodbyes essentially. But I mean, we did it. And so so that was my night. Then we had another call on 275 westbound and stuff like that. But yeah, it was just a late night essentially. So as soon as I got back, I knocked out, and so I'm doing this fresh off a nap basically. Um, but yeah, I'm gonna get back into it though. And so, oh yeah, also one final thing. April 22nd is going to be that kind of like that spring fling at UC Blue Ash. And so if one of you are free, want to meet up with me and all that, and just say hi, I'll be there. With my mom especially, because she works in the chemistry department. So I'll probably be just bugging her for a couple hours while I'm there. But yeah, just to get back into it, we ended off with, I believe, the Kent State massacre. Um, and so after that, about a year later, or I think, yeah, about a year later, Nikita Khrushchev, he ends up dying of a heart attack. And so, Mikhail Gorbachev, he ends up taking over as prime minister. And so that kind of helps ease things up because he wants things to be done. He wants everything to be over. This whole Cold War thing is just for the birds. And so, 72, that's when Nixon ends up ending the conflict. And, well, he ends up signing the Paris Peace Accords, which ends direct military involvement. So basically, he, by this time, leaves the South Vietnamese to fend for themselves. He trains them, he gives them the weapons, and he's just like, all right, have fun. You guys got this from here. And so he pulls out U.S. troops at this time. It's like a slow descent. So he slowly reduces military activity in Vietnam. And so by the Paris Peace Accords, he also increases positive relations with China by signing the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty as well. So by doing so, this helped actually limit nuclear arms between Soviets and the U.S. In general. He feels this kind of added pressure from the re-election and needed a way to actually secure the presidency by doing so. So that's why he did it. This also was a way to actually retaliate against his opponents, but then he also needed a way to actually find out info about them in order to secure that next presidency. And so he ends up wiretapping the Oval Office essentially by this time. So that's where we're going to get into for the next one. By this time as well, you get a lot of people who essentially they wanted to have sex, and so by this time you got the baby boomers. You also got people who wanted to create these big families. You got this issue of overpopulation coming up and all that too. And so by doing so, that's when you get to Eisenstadt versus Baird. So Eisenstadt versus Baird was basically the Supreme Court ruled it is legal to supply birth control to everyone, not just restricted to married individuals, because at that time, you also had married individuals who by this time they're like, all right, we have our families, we don't want to continue on. And so the women were allowed to be prescribed birth control. Well, at this time, you also had people who are children and like young adults who were sneaking birth control in order to have sex. Well, some of them started just having sex willy-nilly and then getting pregnant earlier pregnancy. So then the Supreme Court was like, all right, let's just give birth control to everybody. Well, they didn't think about the side effects of that. And so the side effects included early onset strokes and early recognition of hypertension in young adults. And so people then wanted safer options. Well, then that's when they created the IUD. So the IUD came in the early 70s. So IUDs were not 100% foolproof, but they were just enough to make it feel safe like they were. But ultimately they ended up being pulled from the market. And then, so then there's another natural way. So women, they started to enter the workforce and they held off on marriage and childbirthing. And so by this time, by the early 70s, there's just a rapid decline in childbirth. So this kind of ends that idea of the, what was it? The, not the space race, man. Kind of probably still tired from that baby boom, essentially. And so then you got another thing. You got Roe versus Wade. You got the idea of reproductive rights. And so this whole idea of abortion is not just recent. This has been stemming for decades. And so basically the question, here we go. Yeah, we got my cat. And so basically we have this idea of, I'm going to turn this off. There we go. You got this idea that abortion was a woman's right prior to the fetus being able to thrive without the host, essentially. So as long as the fetus was not able to thrive, then abortion was ruled legal. So you gotta have that kind of like back and forth. Some people think that no, that's not right, or other people think that is right. And so this battle with abortion, like the idea of abortion, especially within the Christian realm, and so it's just not okay for them. But essentially, according to everyone else, especially people who were not as religious, or could be people who were religious as well. So it's just a question that a lot of people have been fighting over for decades, essentially. So you got that, and then you also got, around this time as well, the Yom Kippur War. So this is kind of going to stem into what we've been dealing with now, especially in the last 5 years. So by this time, guess who was in NATO? Israel and us. So we were allies with Israel at this time. And so during Yom Kippur, which is like a Jewish holiday, basically the 10th day of Ramadan, I believe, Egypt, they wanted to capture the Suez Canal. And so they also wanted to negotiate the return of the Sinai Peninsula. And so there's like a ceasefire line, but Israel and Egypt both crossed it. So this is all at war by this point. The issue, though, now is that Egypt was backed by the USSR. U.S. backed Israel. So now this is another kind of like ramp up of the Cold War. And so there's an oil embargo on the U.S. by Arab oil producing nations, essentially. And so basically it's like the OAPEC, and so it's the Arab Petroleum Exportation Country, or countries, essentially. It's just this like culmination of Arab-based countries who supplied oil to the U.S. They started embargoing that. And so this drove up the price at gas stations. Fuel rationing started, energy shortages started happening, inflation began, and so nobody could really go more than 55 miles per hour because anything beyond that would waste so much gas. So this was like a countrywide regulation that they could not go over a certain mile per hour. And this then led to the development of the alternative energy movement. So you got, water energy, electrical use energy, battery. And so, inadvertently, this embargo actually led to the energy conservation movement, essentially. And so, this fighting raged on, and essentially after about 20,000, give or take, casualties, then on both sides, after 2 weeks, the fighting just stopped. There was a ceasefire, which was negotiated by the UN at that time. And basically the U.S. Army doctrine learned from this war. So they got analyses from Israel stating that essentially like how to fight this war. And so since the USSR actually backed Egypt, they're like, hey, this is how the USSR fights a ground war. Here's the tactics that we used against them. Take it how you see fit. And so the U.S. took that war as kind of like a research opportunity. So essentially they were researching how people killed other people, essentially. And so you got the Paris Peace Accords at that time, which was signed ending U.S. mobilization and participation in Vietnam, especially. And then you got U.S. soldiers who were removed from Vietnam by that time. So they are officially fully removed. And so now the North Vietnamese, by this like 73 now, and so the North Vietnamese started like just pushing into South Vietnam, and they took over territory after territory without much issue. And so by this time they were just like, it's on them, we don't have a foot in this anymore. But then, so that point earlier when I went back to how Nixon has to secure the presidency somehow. And so he kind of cheated. And so now he had 5 burglars snuck into the Democratic Committee headquarters. And they wiretapped phones to listen into the committee's talks. And these burglars were caught and arrested. And along with these 5 burglars, another 26 others were persecuted as people being involved in this scandal. And so Nixon, by this time, he knew that he was pretty much caught. And so he had to do something. It's either he couldn't continue, because by continuing, he then would risk losing the presidency, and then also possibly even being impeached. And then if he didn't continue, like if he automatically just dropped out right then and there, then it would be kind of suspicious. So he didn't know what to do, so he kind of kept going for a little bit, but then ultimately he ends up just retiring his presidency. He didn't say what for. He just pretty much just like he left. I believe actually he did say something, but I'm not that too knowledgeable. So political history, not the best. My knowledge is not the best with that, but I believe he did say something, but it's not related to this incident. So this incident is actually known as the Watergate Scandal. And so you can read a little bit more about it if you want to, but ultimately this scandal pretty much just tanked his presidency. And then after that, so after the Nixon administration, you got the Gerald R. Ford administration. And so this administration ends up pardoning Nixon for what he did. And basically, their foreign policy was that they wanted to focus further on the Dente with USSR, which is admitting that, okay, USSR and the US will be at a ceasefire. And so they pretty much just acknowledged one the other. And so they oversaw the removal of troops from Vietnam after the North Vietnamese invaded South Vietnam. And then by 75, the Helsinki Accords happened. And so this was pretty much almost all existing European countries basically signed this document, which improved Dente or strained relations with the East or the West and West. It was not binding by any means, and therefore it didn't mean anything really. And so the countries in Europe had the idea to either or had the ability to either accept it or deny it. They didn't have to abide by it. So Henry Kissinger was another political party member. He ends up telling Ford the U.S. didn't want to sign these accords because it meant nothing to them. And so essentially these accords only meant something to European countries. To the U.S., what did it mean? Because it doesn't abide by anything over here. So why should we listen to it? Nor did it abide by the USSR. These agreements only meant the forced incorporation of the Baltic states into the USSR and Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, essentially. And so, essentially, this meant for the UN-backed countries to accept that Dente was a thing, that there were strained relations between the East and the West, and that there was something to do about it. But at the same time, the USSR wasn't abiding by this because they only abide by the Warsaw Pact, not the UN stuff. And so the USSR didn't care. They were like, yeah, whatever. We're going to continue on building warheads, and we're going to continue on blocking NATO push into Warsaw-backed nations. And so so yeah, that was the whole thing with the Helsinki Accords. It's a weird kind of thing, but essentially it was something that was used to actually help the Cold War, but it essentially didn't matter really. Well, I don't want to say it didn't matter, but it didn't do as much as what we thought it could do, in theory. And so this is decaf. Yeah, Black Panther's my favorite. Super sick character, but yeah, I have decaf coffee. I know, it doesn't. Decaf coffee doesn't do anything, but I just enjoy the taste of it, and so yeah. But I'm really weird. Black coffee with 2 sugar, essentially, or this one is black coffee, 2 sugar, and oat milk. And so it's weird. It's a weird taste, but it's not bad. I do know, though, if you guys go to, Cracker Barrel, their coffee, I don't know what they do with it, but it's actually really good. But no, I digress. So the fall of Saigon happened in 75, which happened after the Helsinki Accords, essentially. And the North Vietnamese ended up capturing the South Vietnam capital, and the U.S. embassy that was stationed there was eventually evacuated in the largest helicopter evacuation in history, essentially. And so helicopters arrived with evacuees on the USS Midway, and she basically just sailed away. They wiped their hands with it, but this left a bad taste in the South Vietnamese mouth about this, and so we left thousands and thousands of refugees and innocent people, civilians there, to be at the mercy of the North Vietnamese. Now that same year, in the spring, May, I think that's still spring. May 12th of 1975. So this, please follow along because this is essentially the last battle, technically, last battle of the Vietnam War. But this battle is so convoluted with stuff. I'm going to be back. I do have to get my whiteboard. So give me like 10 seconds. 10 seconds. All right, and we're back. It's a nice little break. So, so the Mayaguez incident. So the Mayaguez was on the USS Mayaguez was a ship. I believe it was a cargo ship. I want to say, and so in Cambodia, there was a military regime, an uprising that started on the Khmer Rouge. And so they seized this American cargo ship on the USS Mayaguez in international waters. So, whew. And so afterwards, they took the crew hostage, but that was only after they sent an SOS out to the U.S. saying that, hey, we need help. So, So, Mayaguez, USS Mayaguez incident. All right. Hopefully, you guys are following along. So, insurgents. So these insurgents had these like little speedboats, and so speedboats. And so, I mean, these insurgents were armed with like small machine guns. Of course, probably like AK-47s or the AK-74. Kind of like those smaller, compact rifles. And so, AK-47s, 74s, possibly. So then you have the U.S. So these men essentially took. So they took these. What was it? They took these personnel hostage, and they started speeding away. So they wanted to make it back to the homeland. Well, the SOS sent a signal out to a nearby task force, who then ended up relaying that signal, and then they needed a way to actually scare these guys into returning these crew members without causing any bloodshed. And so, essentially, earlier on, the U.S. used F-111. So the F-111 at the time was, I believe, the fastest fighter jet we had produced. Except for at this time the F-15 was still in development, so that would have been the fastest one. But I believe at this time the F-111 was the fastest and also the most technologically advanced one. Which, fun fact, because one of the reasons why it did end up being retired so early was the fact that because it was basically used as a test mule, and so the aardvark, and so this fighter jet had so many technological advances that it was essentially plagued with electrical issues because they were just trying to create new ways of warfare with this aircraft. But essentially, yeah, the F-111, the U.S. used the F-111 to buzz these gunships or these speedboats, so it would fly low. Perfect. Actually, I have an F 14. I'll use that. And so all right. So we got an F-14 here. So basically, the F-111 was a precursor to the F-14. And so I got a Jolly Rogers F-14. And so what these F-11s would do, and so the F-14, essentially, it will come in like this. So it will come in like this, and then as it noticed these speedboats coming away, its wings would retract like that. And so then it would become basically a delta configuration, more speed, more maneuverability. So it would come in like that and then swoop down on low altitude and basically scare the bejesus out of them. Scare them into coming back or returning these troops. And so you got F-111s. So that didn't really work out. They continued on with their mission. Well, then that's when the U.S. was like, all right, fine. You want to play games? We can play games. It's been, what, like months since we've seen any kind of activity. We're kind of hurting for some fighting. So you know that feeling where it's like you've gone years without being in a fist fight, and so when someone's like, "Hey, we're gonna mess with this person," you're like, "Oh, please do, because I want to get into this fight right now." It's kind of like that, and so that's what the U.S. was doing. They were like, "Please, come on, we want to fight," and so because they didn't return these troops, that's when the U.S. ends up sending up an AC-130 gunship, and so they now have an AC-130 in the air at this point. And so this gunship ends up bombing naval ports in the Cambodian mainland to scare them. These guys are seeing this happen as they're trying to transport these hostages around the Cambodian border. And so no matter where they go, this AC-130 is destroying every single naval port they can find. And so a day later, you also got U.S. Marines who were detached on 5 CH-53s and the HH-53 Sikorskis helicopters. And then they had a ground unit that was aboard these helicopters to board the Maiguez. And so they did so. They didn't find anything. They found it empty. And so afterwards, though, another 3 helicopters ended up being shot down and 1 crashed offshore when they tried to reach the mainland. And so essentially you got this. So you got CH-53s, 5 HH. So this is the firepower discrepancy between the two. So you got these Khmer Rouge who were in speedboats and had small arms. The U.S. had F-111s, AC-130s, CH-53s, and HH-53s. So what kind of war is it, or what kind of battle is this, essentially? And so Western Beach. So you got Western Beach and Eastern Beach, okay? And so these guys, the U.S. is thinking, all right, let's land on this beach. Let's basically do an amphibious assault, essentially. All right. Since I don't know where my eraser is. All right. So let's see how I can write this. I think this is roughly how it's all laid out. All right. So, Knife 21 and Knife 22, which were call signs for the amphibious assaults. So both of them get on the beach, but they're then engaged by small arms and rocket fire. Essentially, um, the Knife 21 ends up detaching the troops before they can even before it crashed offshore, essentially. And so then Knife 22 and then 32 ended up barely making it back to the Thai mainland because they were severely damaged. So you got Western Beach. So you got 21 and 22. So then 21, 22. Cool. All right. So you got Knife 20 on Eastern Beach. You got Knife 23 and 31. So Knife 23 ends up crashing on the beach after sustaining heavy damage, essentially. And so, yeah, Knife 23. So Knife 23 is on the beach now, on the eastern side. And then, so Knife 23 sustained damage. Knife 31 ends up bursting into flames from an RPG and is smashed onto the shoreline. 18 crew members of the 26 ends up surviving and got out. So then you got Knife 31 ends up on that beach as well. The shoreline, essentially. And so, I'm going to put a tally up here. Yeah. All right. So then, A7 Corsairs. So you got these Corsairs who came in to provide airstrikes on the island. And so 54 U.S. Marines are now on this island with 14 already dead. So you got 54 essentially. U.S. crew. All right, so So basically, this is how the beach is. And so on either side, that's where you get both Knife 21, 22, 23, and 31. All right? And so the Marines who had crashed on the island, they sustained heavy fire from gun positions that were stationed on the island. So you got all these gun positions that were on this island. And so they were pretty much just blocking the inside of this island. So additional reinforcements from Jolly Green 42 and 43 were dropped to provide basically a 110-man defense perimeter as they extracted these soldiers. So then you got Jolly 41 and Jolly 13 who attempted to rescue, but they failed due to enemy fire being too intense. So Jolly 41 and 13, Jolly 41, 13, 42, and 43. Alright, so 42 and 43 were pretty much the only ones that were able to actually make it on land and actually rescue or provide rescue. And so then, let's see here. So, another one, A7 F4. I got an F4. So. Alright, so F4 Phantom. One of the fastest jets to ever be produced. So then you got A7 Corsairs. You also have F4s and then AC-130 now, which surrounded this whole entire island. So you got F4s, which provide most of your close air support. You got A7s, who also provide some. The A7 Corsairs provide a little bit more air support, but the F4 Phantom can carry more firepower, essentially. So the F4 actually carries, fun fact, carries twice as much firepower as the B-17 from World War II. Fun fact for you guys. But now, back to the main mission here. And so, Jolly 41 unloaded its crew and came back to too severe of damage to fly, essentially. The Mike West crew, the ones who were held hostage, they were given back to the U.S. Navy aboard the USS destroyer Henry B. Wilson, hoping to end the bombing of the mainland. They were like, you know what, fuck this, we're done. Excuse my language. They were like, we're done. We're not coming back. So they give them up. But the issue, though, is that now we have men stuck on this beach that we need to get out that were sustaining heavy fire from these Khmer Rouge resistance groups, or these basically rebel groups. And so now, by this time, 82 men were on the western beach, and then another, 29 on the south side, and then another like 25 on the eastern side. So, remember when I said over on the eastern side, this one caught fire and exploded. But now you got Knife 23 with 25 men who are held up here. Then over on the western side, you got 82 people who are over here, including the people who were dropped by Jolly 42 and 43 to help secure a perimeter. But then you got another 29 people who moved south to cut off this flank, who were stuck over there too. And so then about that time, you got Knife 51. 51. You also have Jolly 43, which already landed. You got Jolly 11 now, and then you got Jolly 12. They all successfully delivered additional men on the beach. So now, the number is up to about 230 men. This is getting insane. Just to rescue these people. So 230 men now have a defensive perimeter. So 240 men now have a defensive perimeter around this island in order to push back against these insurgents who are fighting them, in order to protect the extraction of these additional troops. So Jolly 11 lands and retrieves another 25 men from the eastern beach. And so you got 11s over here, which... Oop, man, this is going out. So Jolly 11, they remove 25 men over here. And so then Jolly 12 held suppressing fire, and then Knife 23 and 51 came back to help Jolly 11 get the remaining guys out. And so you got 11. You also got 23 and 51. So 51, also Knife 51, sorry. And then Knife 23. And so both of them ends up coming out, getting these 25 guys out. Now, with that being said, okay. So now, with that extraction, that's where we get the AC-130 wants to play fighting. He wants to get in on the fight. So he comes along with a 15,000 pound bomb. Now that's a big bomb. So essentially, he drops it right in the middle of this island. And then he uses that. So it sucks that I don't have an AC-130 anywhere. Yeah, I don't have one anywhere. So now He drops his bomb, so it explodes. Gonna good old mushroom cloud. All right. So then you got this big mushroom cloud in the middle, and so this kind of like holds off any fire. So they pretty much just like, all right, job done. Let's get these people out of here. So then at night, Knife 51 and Jolly 43 and 44, they successfully loaded the Marines from the West Beach, the 82 and 29 over here. And so everyone on the Eastern Beach seems to be taken good care of. 44 and Knife 51, they land on the west side. As the AC-130 continues its attacks, its suppressive attacks on the middle part of the island, to essentially sustain suppressive fire of these troops. They loaded all the men on the helicopter and looked for any additional men. Nobody came, so they packed up and left. And so with all this, about 65 casualties and 3 missing. 3 missing. So, so it's not funny, but they got back to the back to base, and so they did roll call, but then 3 people went up missing. They're like, "You gotta be kidding me!" Who? So now they're distraught. So on the West Beach, everyone but 3 people. 3 Marines actually set up an M60, which is a light machine gun. They set up an M60 machine gun position on the far right flank of the beach. So remember, 82. So remember when I said that they were holed up west side and then the south side? Well, these guys actually set up a position way out down here to just cover this flanking position from the attackers in the middle. None of these guys knew that, and so they all landed over here. Well, the LZ was over here, but they didn't think to check down south towards the southern end of the island. And so there was no landing light on the aircraft either. So none of these troops knew what was going on at the time. Captain Mike Stahl, he ends up reporting all this, that his men were accounted for, but then he made an error actually. And so Sergeant Anderson, at around 10. So about 8 o'clock, it was like 8:10 p.m. or something like that, he told them to move to the left flank to provide cover. And that's the last he saw of them, essentially. And so that's pretty much the last, so the left flank. So yeah, that's the last he saw of these troops when they moved out to protect that flank. And so there was actually a radio transmission later on, though. A radio transmission from an unknown Marine asked when the next helicopter was to be arriving, and that they were ordered to actually swim out to sea, but they said only one can swim. And so search and rescue operations ended up happening off the coast of the island, but no signal of the Marines were ever found. A year later, they were designated KIA, essentially, and so we just stopped looking for them. But then later on, I think it was about 10 years later, actually, eyewitnesses say that after the last helicopter, the gun position was encircled, and one of the 3 Americans ended up being killed, while the other 2 ended up surviving and escaping. The other was wounded, but he ended up ended up able to get away, while the 3rd one just full on escaped. The wounded one was later shot after he had been wounded at that. After he wounded a Khmer Rouge soldier, and so then he was shot, and then later the 3rd was tracked down after eating their food. So he found a nearby Khmer Rouge camp, and he ends up eating their food while they're away, and then he ends up booking it. Well, he was tracked down, and they actually found, what was it? Oh yeah, that other soldier who had been shot. They tracked him down as well, or they took him in as well. And so the two soldiers were taken to the mainland, and they were imprisoned, but then they end up being beaten to death with this like rocket launcher. So that's heavy. That's a lot of weight to take on top of your noggin. So they were taken out. They were both killed, and they were dumped on the Sihanouk coastline. So basically, off the coastline on the beach, they dumped them. All right, so that's essentially the last known battle of the Vietnam War. And so there's way more into the Vietnam War, but there is so much more that we have to cover. So I urge you guys to look more into the Vietnam War. I can post some stuff on the Vietnam War throughout the day into the module section. So the module section has all the videos and interactive maps and websites in order to get additional information on this stuff. I believe I stopped at World War II, or like, yeah, I believe I stopped at World War II, but I can upload more videos as I go along. And so, yeah, that's the last major battle of Vietnam before we fully pull out and we are not in cahoots in that part of the world anymore. So, 1976. Jimmy Carter becomes president, and his foreign policy is on essentially pardoning. He pardoned these Vietnam draft evaders essentially, and so no more persecution. And then the Panama Canal Treaty was signed, which allowed Panama to be granted control of the canal after 1999. He then began diplomatic relations with China to help ease those tensions between us. And then 1978, the Camp David Accords happened. So Jimmy Carter, he met with Egypt's president Anwar Sadat and Israel's Prime Minister Menachem Begin, and he signed a treaty of peace between the two countries. So this was the first time an Arab country recognized a Jewish country. And so further talks were dealt with under the Egypt-Israel treaty, and that was to be dealt with later on, essentially. But Palestinian independence was brought about without Palestinian representation. So this is essentially the same with how the Czechs during World War II were unknowingly given away to Nazi Germany without their say-so. When additional nations were trying to basically appease Germany into stopping their expansion. So this was the same thing that was happening to Palestinian independence. So I hope you guys are seeing the parallel between back then and now and how things are kind of moving. And so this actually led to discontent among Arab nations. So in 1979, the USSR was still allies with countries in the Middle East, especially Afghanistan. So they started to support them politically. Now they had diplomats within Afghanistan, and 50 of these Soviet diplomats were actually killed in a rebel attack in Herat and Amin. And then Amin was put in power as prime minister, essentially. And so Taraki was to retake power under the help of the USSR, backed by Leonid, Brezhnev. And so, I'm going to write these down. So, Brezhnev. To be prime minister. So, Leonid Brezhnev wanted to back Amin to be prime minister, and afterwards, Amin caught wind of this, and he assassinated Taraki. Taraki was to be retake power, so Amin had him assassinated. So Taraki, let's see if I can write right-handed. Hey, not too bad. So Taraki ends up being assassinated, and so my cat keeps seeing birds, so that's why the camera's shaking. And so the USSR then afterwards invades Afghanistan to fix the situation militarily. They're basically like, if you don't do this, we're gonna take control for ya. And so, oh, so then afterwards, Armin, sorry, Armin, not Amin. Armin was assassinated and Kamal was replaced as prime minister, essentially. So then, because of all of this stuff going on, Dente was thrown out the window. And so the U.S. was like, we got to do something about this. We got to fix this. We cannot just keep letting the things go by like this. And so Dente was thrown out there, like, had gloves off. We're going to go in and we're going to lay waste. And so the U.S. ends up seeing this invasion as an act of aggression of a sovereign state. Jimmy Carter set a grain embargo on the USSR and boycott the Moscow Olympics at that time as well. And so money and weapons were funded by the U.S., which were funneled through the underground resistance groups under Pakistan, the Mujahaideen. And so then later on, you also get another guy named Osama Bin Laden. So then, write his name down. So, in order to get into the war in Afghanistan and actually help them out, and push USSR out, the U.S. Ends up having to fund this resistance group. Mujahaideen. So this Mujahaideen was also resistance group or freedom fighters, essentially. And Laden. All right, so you got the U.S. who then fund the Mujahideen as a resistance group to push the USSR out to fight this war against the USSR. Osama bin Laden is kind of like that main guy to help them out, and so Osama bin Laden actually moves. He goes out to Saudi Arabia to help the Afghan resistance out there fight them back under the funding of the U.S. essentially. So he's helping them, and so the CIA ends up funding Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who is an ally of Osama bin Laden. So they are the CIA. See if I can spell his name right. Hekmatyar. Something on an eye. So, the CIA ends up funding Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who is another ally of Osama bin Laden, essentially. And so now you got Saudi Arabia, who ends up going to war in order against the USSR to push out, what was it, the USSR out of Afghanistan, and stuff like that. So now you got Pakistan, who's at war with the USSR essentially. And so now you got the war with the USSR versus Pakistan, which officially begins in the 80s. And so then you got Operation Freedom, I want to say later on. But otherwise, I'm going to keep it there because our last lecture is going to go into the war in the Middle East and then into now. So there's a lot of things in the war in the Middle East that will coincide with what's going on now in order to help you guys kind of like tie everything in, essentially. And so I'm going to have it all done. Hopefully, actually, I might do it tonight just so I can have it. Unless, well, Nah, I'll probably take the day to myself. Since it's a nice day out, and I do got to do some cleaning, but essentially, this kicks off the war in the Middle East, and from here on out, you guys are gonna see a lot of connections from here. Um, well, from the 80s, 70s, 80s to now, where this is kind of like how things kind of culminate into come full circle into now. So that's just kind of my thing. I like to make connections, and so by doing so, I hope this helps you kind of like break things down and see like, oh, this is why things are the way they are. So that's kind of my take on it. But yeah, otherwise, that's the end of today's lectures. So 70s to 80s. Our final one's going to be 80s to 90s. You also have that final paper, 8 to 10 pages. So you could basically do that within a week if time permits. So it basically it's like 5 pages single spaced. So 4 to 5 pages single spaced. And so if that helps you guys out, just write 4 pages single spaced and then just double space it, and then you should be about 8 pages at least. So yeah, can you guys get that taken care of? I'll get the rest of these midterms taken care of. I think I have like maybe, oh, I think I did all of them. But yeah, the turning point papers, I'll do those. Um, and then essentially, yeah, that'll be it. I'll have one more lecture after the final lecture. Just kind of like a goodbye one too. Just to be like, hey, this is the end of the class. So nothing important, just me just kind of like rambling on for a little bit. So I like to do that just to, become personable with the students and just kind of bring a little fun light to this subject matter. But I guess as you guys are going along in this class, I hope you guys understand that America was built on a lot of different stuff, and some good, some bad. But that's just the fact of the matter. Is that America was built on industrial usage, and then kind of exploration um, and new technology and invention. But it was also built on war and death and slavery as well. And so the U.S. is not, it's simply, compared to other nations, it's just as bad, but also just as good. And so I hope you guys make these connections by the time the class ends, is that we're not the only ones that were caught in bad situations. But essentially, that is about it. So if you guys don't have any questions, feel free to email me if you do have any questions, or if you wanted to do anything, wanted me to explain anything else in depth. I do have, I think so what is that? Other than that, I think that's about it, really, I want to say. But yeah, I'm gonna get going, and so, you guys take care, and if you guys got nothing else for me, I'm gonna peace out and take care of this cat, Oh, also, anyway, here's, come here, little buddy. Oh. So here's the cat. So yeah, otherwise, you guys take care now.